Duke Logan Coates had perfected the art of icy detachment until a single arrow pierced his chest and shattered his lifelong vow in a bloody heartbeat. Moments before, he had been the untouchable Duke of Ashbourne, the man who famously swore to his peers that he would never lower himself to love a commoner. Now he was staggering across his own manicured lawn, blood staining his waistcoat, reaching out for the terrified landscape architect he had tried so hard to despise. The cost of his pride had been a lonely life. The cost of saving her, it might just be his life. The private gaming room of the St. James Club hummed with the low, murmured bets of London's most powerful men. Thick cigar smoke curled around the velvet drapes, obscuring the dim gaslight, while stewards glided between the card tables bearing crystal decanters of amber whiskey. Logan Coates, the Duke of Ashbourne, had positioned himself in his usual leather wingback chair near the hearth, a glass of untouched scotch in his hand. From here, he could survey the room with a look of bored disdain, ignoring the fawning attempts of lesser peers trying to catch his eye or solicit a loan. At 29, Logan had perfected the art of absolute impenetrable coldness. Not that he was cruel without cause, simply pragmatic. After his father's scandalous gambling had nearly stained the Ashbourne name, Logan had spent a decade scrubbing the tarnish away with rigid discipline and terrifying standards. Emotional entanglements were a liability he could not afford. His lineage was the only currency that mattered. Then came the slur from across the table, a drunken, sneering jest from his rival, Lord Vesby, implying Logan had a weakness for a shop girl. Logan didn't shout. He didn't even stand. He simply set his glass down with a sharp clack that silenced the room. "I will never love a commoner," he declared, his voice cutting through the smoke like a blade. He spoke the words with the certainty of a god. He didn't know that in 6 weeks he would be bleeding out in the mud to prove himself a liar. The private gaming room at the St. James Club was quiet, except for the soft sound of cards shuffling and ice clinking in glasses. Thick cigar smoke hung in the air, making the dim lights look hazy. Logan Coates, the Duke of Ashbourne, sat in a high-backed leather chair near the fire. He held a glass of scotch but didn't drink it. He just watched the other men with a look of pure boredom. At 29, Logan was rich, powerful, and famously cold. He didn't care about making friends. He only cared about protecting his family name from scandal. Suddenly, a sneering laugh broke the silence. It was Lord Vesby, a man Logan despised. Vesby leaned across the card table, grinning wickedly. "Come now, Logan, don't look so sour. I heard rumors that you have a soft spot for that pretty shop girl in the village." The room went completely silent. Every man stopped what he was doing to look at the Duke. Logan didn't shout. He didn't even stand up. He simply set his glass down on the table with a sharp clack. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. He looked at Vesby with eyes like ice. "I will never love a commoner," Logan said, his voice steady and hard. "My family line is worth more than a moment of foolish affection. I would rather be alone forever than lower myself." He meant every word. He had no idea that his promise was about to be broken. Weeks later and miles away, Lily Murphy stepped out of a dusty carriage and stared up at Ashbourne Manor. It was the biggest house she had ever seen, with tall stone towers that seemed to touch the grey sky. Lily took a deep breath of the country air. She wasn't a rich lady of the court. She was a landscape architect, hired to fix the estate's crumbling gardens. She looked around at the overgrown hedges and dead rose bushes. Most people would see a mess, but Lily saw a masterpiece waiting to happen. She smiled, tightening her grip on her sketchbook. "You must be Miss Murphy," a stern voice called out. Lily turned to see an older woman in a stiff black dress standing at the heavy oak doors. It was Mrs. Halloway, the housekeeper. "Yes, ma'am," Lily said brightly. "I'm ready to get to work. The Duchess said I have free rein to fix the gardens." Mrs. Halloway didn't smile back. She looked at Lily with a mixture of pity and worry. "You may have the Duchess's permission, but this is the Duke's home. Stay out of his way, girl." Lily frowned, confused by the serious tone. "Is he difficult?" The housekeeper leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a warning whisper. "He isn't just difficult. He hates change, and he hates strangers. You best keep your head down. The Duke isn't a man, he's a beast." The next morning, the sky was a bruised, purple, threatening rain. Lily didn't mind. She was already knee-deep in the soil of the East Garden, fighting with a stubborn tangle of weeds. Her boots were caked in mud, and a smudge of dirt streaked across her cheek, but she hummed a little tune as she worked. This garden was a mess, but she could already see the beauty hiding underneath. Suddenly the ground shook. Lily froze. It wasn't thunder. It was the rhythmic, heavy pounding of hooves. She stood up just as a massive black horse burst through the hedge, galloping straight toward her. "Look out!" she screamed, throwing herself backward. She landed hard in a puddle of cold, thick mud. The horse reared up, its hooves slashing the air inches from her face, before the rider wrestled the beast to a stop. Lily gasped for breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked up, ready to yell an apology, but the words died in her throat. The rider was young and handsome, but his face was twisted in a scowl. He sat high on the saddle, looking down at her like she was a bug he wanted to squash. It was the Duke. "You foolish girl," Logan snapped, his voice cold and sharp. "Do you have a death wish, or are you just too simple to hear a horse coming?" Lily blinked, wiping mud from her eyes. She expected him to ask if she was hurt. Instead, he was angry that she was in his way. "I was working, Your Grace," she said, her voice shaking slightly as she stood up. She tried to brush the muck off her apron, but it was hopeless. "This is a garden, not a racetrack." Logan raised an eyebrow. He wasn't used to servants talking back. "This is my estate," he said, leaning forward, "and you are blocking my path. Next time, move faster or I won't stop." He gathered the reins, ready to ride off and leave her there, soaked and dirty. Something inside Lily snapped. She knew he was a duke and she was nobody, but she couldn't let him bully her. "It wasn't my fault," she called out before she could stop herself. Logan paused, turning the horse around slowly. "Excuse me." Lily stood tall, even though she was covered in mud. "The horse didn't see me because you were pulling his head too far to the left. You have heavy hands, Your Grace. You're confusing the poor animal." Silence stretched between them, heavier than the storm clouds above. Logan stared at her, his mouth slightly open. He was the best rider in the county. No one, certainly not a muddy little gardener, had ever dared to critique his riding. "You have a sharp tongue for a commoner," he said quietly, his eyes narrowing. "And you have bad manners for a nobleman," Lily shot back. For a second, Logan looked like he might explode. Then, without another word, he kicked his horse into a gallop and stormed away, leaving Lily alone in the mud, shaking but proud. 2 days later, Lily stood in the Duke's private study. The room smelled like old paper and lemon polish. She nervously smoothed her skirt and laid her large sketchbook on the heavy oak desk. Logan stood on the other side, looking down at her drawings with a deep frown. "This is unacceptable," Logan said, tapping a long finger on the paper. "What is this mess?" Lily took a deep breath to steady her nerves. She had drawn a plan for the West Garden featuring winding stone paths, wild climbing roses, and a weeping willow tree by the pond. "It's a natural English garden, Your Grace. I want it to feel wild and free, like nature intended." Logan shook his head, his face hard. "Nature is messy. I want order. I want straight hedges cut into sharp squares. I want gravel paths that go in perfect straight lines. This looks like a jungle. But perfect lines are boring, Lily argued, forgetting for a moment that she was speaking to a powerful duke. A garden should have life. It should have color and movement. It shouldn't look like a prison yard. Logan's eyes flashed with anger. He wasn't used to people arguing with him, especially not the muddy gardener who had insulted his riding skills just yesterday. I am not paying you to make my home look like a wilderness. I want structure, discipline. If you cannot understand that, then you are of no use to me. He straightened his coat and pointed sharply at the door. You are fired, Miss Murphy. Pack your things and leave. Lily's heart sank. She grabbed her sketchbook, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. She turned to storm out, but the heavy door swung open before she could reach it. An elegant woman swept into the room. It was the Dowager Duchess, Logan's mother. She looked frail, but her eyes were sharp. No one is firing anyone, Logan, she said calmly. Logan sighed, running a hand through his hair. Mother, this girl is impossible. Her designs are chaos. Her designs are beautiful, the Duchess corrected. I hired Miss Murphy because this estate feels like a tomb. It needs life, Logan, just like you do. Logan stiffened. I do not need life. I need order. You need to listen, his mother said firmly. The garden renovation is my project for the season's ball. Miss Murphy stays, and since you are so concerned with the outcome, you will help her oversee the work to make sure it is done in time. Lily looked between them, wide-eyed. Logan clenched his jaw so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek. He looked at Lily with cold resentment. He was trapped. Very well, he muttered, sounding like every word hurt him. But if you plant one weed where it doesn't belong, Miss Murphy, you will answer to me. Lily didn't back down. She met his glare with a spark of defiance. We start tomorrow at dawn, Your Grace. Don't be late. The sky turned dark grey in an instant. Lily was inside the grand glass conservatory, carefully trimming a row of delicate orchids. Logan stood near the door, arms crossed, watching her every move like a hawk. He had promised his mother he would supervise, and he took that duty seriously. A sudden crack of thunder shook the ground. Rain poured down instantly, drumming against the glass roof so loud it sounded like rocks hitting the ceiling. The wind howled, rattling the panes and turning the garden outside into a blurry wash of green and grey. We are trapped, Logan muttered, looking out at the wall of water. I cannot ruin my boots in that flood. Lily wiped her hands on her apron. The air in the greenhouse was warm and smelled of damp earth and sweet blossoms. It felt very small with the Duke standing so close. He looked out of place among the ferns, too stiff and starched for the wild greenery. To break the awkward silence, Lily pointed to a prickly purple plant she had just watered. Do you know what this one means, Your Grace? Logan looked at her, confused. It is a plant, Miss Murphy. It does not mean anything. It simply exists. Not true, Lily said softly. In the language of flowers, this is a thistle. It stands for nobility, but also for warning. It pushes people away with its thorns to protect itself. Logan looked at the sharp spikes of the thistle. He went quiet. He felt a strange sting in his chest, as if she had just described him perfectly. Plants have to be tough to survive, Lily continued, her voice gentle. Maybe people are the same. Logan sighed and his shoulders dropped just an inch. The cold mask he always wore seemed to crack. He looked less like a duke and more like a tired man. It is not just about being tough, Miss Murphy. It is about holding up the roof. If I relax, even for a moment, everything my family built could collapse. Order is the only thing that keeps the walls standing. It is a heavy weight to carry. Lily looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. She didn't see a beast or a snob. She saw a man who was lonely and afraid of failing. Maybe, she whispered, you don't have to hold it up alone. A garden grows better when the roots have room to breathe. If you squeeze the life out of it with too much order, nothing will bloom. Logan met her eyes. For a few seconds, the sound of the rain faded away. He didn't scold her for speaking out of turn. He didn't sneer. Instead, he looked at the dirt on her hands and then back to her face with a look of quiet curiosity. "Perhaps," he said, his voice low. The storm raged on outside, but inside the glass walls, the ice between them had finally started to melt. The garden was finally coming together. The weeds were gone, and the new flower beds were ready for the upcoming ball. Lily arrived early, humming a tune, excited to see the prize white roses she had planted near the fountain. But when she reached the rosebed, she gasped. The flowers weren't white anymore. They were shriveled and black, oozing a nasty grey slime. The smell of harsh chemicals burned her nose. "No," she whispered, falling to her knees. "Who would do this?" Before she could stand up, a loud crack echoed through the air. A heavy stone statue of a lion, which stood on a pedestal nearby, wobbled and crashed to the ground. It smashed into pieces just feet away from where Lily was kneeling. Dust filled the air, choking her. Servants came running from the house. Mrs. Halloway was at the front. She took one look at the dead roses and the broken statue and turned on Lily with a scowl. "You clumsy girl," the housekeeper shouted. "First you poisoned the Duke's prize roses with your cheap fertilizer, and now you're knocking over heirlooms. You are destroying this estate." "I didn't," Lily cried, her hands shaking. "The roses, they smell like lye, and the statue just fell on its own." "Excuses," Mrs. Halloway snapped. "I will tell the Duke immediately. You'll be gone by noon." "Tell me what?" a deep voice boomed. Logan strode into the garden. He looked at the chaos, the black flowers, the shattered stone, and the terrified gardener trembling in the grass. Mrs. Halloway pointed a shaking finger at Lily. "She is incompetent, Your Grace. She has ruined everything." Logan didn't look at the housekeeper. He walked past her and knelt beside the dead roses. He touched the slime on a petal and sniffed it cautiously. Then he walked to the broken statue. He picked up the thick rope that had held it in place during the repairs. He inspected the end of it closely. "This rope wasn't old," Logan said quietly. "It was clean cut with a knife." He stood up, his eyes dark and dangerous. He looked at the dead roses. "And this isn't bad fertilizer. This is industrial poison. Someone poured it here on purpose." The servants went silent. Lily looked up at him, tears in her eyes, surprised that he believed her. Logan turned to Mrs. Halloway. "Miss Murphy is not clumsy, and she is not incompetent. Someone is trying to sabotage my garden." He stepped closer to Lily, placing himself between her and the angry staff. "And I will find out who it is. Until then, no one speaks a word against her. Is that clear?" "Yes, Your Grace," the staff murmured, hurrying away. Logan looked down at Lily. The coldness was gone from his face, replaced by a fierce, protective look. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. Lily shook her head. "No, thank you for believing me." "I believe my eyes," Logan said, looking toward the estate walls with suspicion. "This wasn't an accident, Lily. It was an attack." The library was the one room in Ashbourne Manor that was strictly off-limits. It was Logan's sanctuary, a place of silence and shadows where he could escape the pressure of being a duke. But tonight, the heavy oak door was cracked open. Logan pushed it wide, ready to scold a careless servant. Instead, he stopped dead in his tracks. Lily was there. She was perched high on a rolling wooden ladder, her work apron replaced by a simple grey dress. A thick, leather-bound book rested in her lap, and she was reading so intently she didn't hear him enter. "You are trespassing, Miss Murphy," Logan said, his voice echoing in the large room. Lily jumped, nearly dropping the book. She scrambled down the ladder, clutching the volume to her chest. "Your Grace, I am so sorry. The door was open and I just wanted to look. I didn't mean to stay." Logan walked toward her. He should have been angry. He should have evicted her immediately. But then he saw the title on the spine of the book she was holding. It wasn't a silly romance novel or a book of poetry. It was a dense, difficult book about ancient philosophy and the burden of leadership. "You are reading Plato?" he asked, his eyebrows raising in genuine surprise. "I'm trying to," Lily admitted, looking down at her worn shoes. "He writes a lot about duty. He says that a good leader must sacrifice his own happiness for the good of his people." It sounded lonely. Logan felt a strange jolt in his chest. He spent his evenings at balls with noblewomen like Lady Arabella, women who only talked about silk ribbons, gossip, and which prince was dancing with whom. None of them had ever understood the weight he carried. But here was a gardener covered in dirt half the time, who understood his life perfectly after reading one chapter. "It is lonely," Logan said softly. He stepped closer, forgetting that he was a duke and she was an employee. "But he also argues that without order there is only chaos." "Maybe," Lily whispered, looking up at him. Her eyes were bright and intelligent. "But order without heart is just a cage." They were standing very close now. The smell of old paper and rain surrounded them. Logan looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she was the only person in the entire castle who actually saw him, not just his title. His heart hammered against his ribs. The air between them felt heavy and electric. Logan leaned in, drawn to her like a moth to a flame. He watched her breath hitch. He wanted to kiss her more than he had ever wanted anything in his life. Then the memory of the club flashed in his mind. "I will never love a commoner." The oath crashed down on him like a bucket of ice water. He stiffened, pulling back sharply, his face twisted into a mask of cold stone. "You should not be here," he said, his voice rough and distant. "This room is for family only. Put the book back, Miss Murphy, and do not return." The warmth of the library felt like a dream the next morning. In its place, the Duke of Ashbourne had built a fortress of ice. For 3 days, Logan looked right through Lily, as if she were made of glass. When she tried to ask him about the placement of the lanterns for the upcoming party, he didn't even stop walking. He simply waved a hand and muttered, "Ask the housekeeper. I have more important matters to attend to." The rejection stung worse than a slap. Lily told herself she shouldn't care. She was just the gardener and he was the Duke. But every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the look in his eyes when he had leaned close in the candlelight. To make matters worse, Lady Arabella arrived at the estate. Arabella was everything Logan had sworn he wanted. She was tall, noble, and perfectly polite. She never argued, she never got her hands dirty, and she certainly never read heavy books about philosophy. Lily was kneeling by the tulip beds, deadheading the faded blooms when she heard them approaching. Logan was walking with Arabella on his arm. He was smiling at her, a stiff, practiced smile, but a smile nonetheless. "The garden is lovely, Logan," Arabella said, her voice light and airy. "It is acceptable," Logan replied smoothly, loud enough for Lily to hear. "Though it is merely a backdrop. A true jewel like you, Arabella, does not need flowers to shine." Lily froze, her shears pausing mid-snip. The words were a direct insult, meant to put her in her place. Logan stopped just a few feet away. He looked down at Lily, his eyes cold and empty. "Miss Murphy," he said formally, "ensure the path is swept. Lady Arabella's dress must not get dusty." "Yes, Your Grace," Lily whispered, staring at the dirt. "Come, Arabella," Logan said, turning his back on Lily. "Let us discuss the announcement we shall make at the ball. The family name must be secured, after all." They walked away, leaving Lily kneeling in the dirt. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and fast. He was doing this on purpose. He was showing her exactly where she belonged, in the mud, while he stood on a pedestal. He was choosing the safe, boring life because he was too much of a coward to admit he had a heart. Lily wiped her face with the back of her glove. The sadness in her chest turned into a heavy, dull ache. She looked at the beautiful garden she had brought back to life, realizing it was time to let it go. "I will finish the grand garden party," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking. "I will make it perfect, and the moment the last guest leaves, I am leaving Ashbourne Manor forever." The sun had not yet risen, and the air was thick with mist. On the edge of the Ashbourne estate, hidden by the dark woods, Lord Vespi stood waiting. He wasn't alone. A man dressed in black stood silently beside him, holding a longbow made of dark yew wood. "The target is clear?" Vespi asked, his voice low and cruel. The assassin nodded, checking the string of his bow. "Aye, my lord. The Duke will fall before the first dance." Vespi grabbed the man's arm, shaking his head. "No, you fool. You are not to touch the Duke. Killing him is too easy. A dead man feels no shame, and he feels no pain." The assassin frowned. "Then who?" Vespi pointed a gloved finger toward the servants' quarters, where a small light had just flickered on. "The girl, the gardener. A commoner?" The assassin sounded confused. "Why waste a good arrow on a weed puller?" Vespi smiled, but it was a cold, ugly smile. "Because the Duke of Ashbourne prides himself on being made of stone. He thinks he is above human feelings. But I have watched him. I saw him in the library with her. I saw the way he looks at her when he thinks no one is watching." Vespi leaned in close, his eyes gleaming with malice. "He loves her. He doesn't want to admit it, but she is his heart. If you put an arrow in her chest, you don't just kill a girl, you break him. You shatter his perfect life forever, and that is a far better revenge." The assassin nodded slowly, understanding the cruelty of the plan. He slipped into the shadows of the bushes, disappearing like a ghost. Hours later, the sun blazed high in the sky. The grand garden party had begun. Ashbourne Manor looked like a painting. Lily's hard work had paid off. The hedges were crisp and green, the fountains sparkled in the sunlight, and the flowers bloomed in riots of color. Hundreds of guests in silk gowns and velvet coats strolled along the gravel paths, gasping at the beauty of the grounds. Lily stood on the far edge of the lawn, hidden in the shade of an old oak tree. She wore her best dress, a simple grey gown that looked plain next to the noblewomen's finery. She wasn't supposed to be a guest, but the Duchess had insisted she stay to see her masterpiece unveiled. She watched the crowd, her heart aching. In the center of the lawn, Logan stood next to Lady Arabella. He looked perfect. He was dressed in a sharp, dark coat, his posture straight and proud. He was smiling at the guests, shaking hands, and playing the part of the perfect Duke. But to Lily, he looked like a statue. His eyes were dull. He didn't look at the flowers. He didn't look at the sky. And he certainly didn't look at her. The music of a string quartet floated through the air, sweet and cheerful. Laughter rang out. It was a perfect day for a party. No one noticed the slight rustle of leaves in the thick bushes just 50 yards away. No one saw the glint of a sharp metal tip catching the sunlight. The trap was set. The garden was beautiful, and it was about to become a battlefield. The string quartet played a polite waltz, but to Logan it sounded like a funeral march. He stood in the center of the lawn, holding a glass of champagne that he had no intention of drinking. Beside him, Lady Arabella was talking about the silk ribbons she wanted for their wedding announcements. "The blue must match the Ashbourne crest exactly," she said, her voice flat and boring. Of course, Logan said mechanically. He felt like he was suffocating in his stiff collar. He was doing exactly what he had promised. He was securing his family name. He was being perfect. And he was absolutely miserable. He couldn't help himself. He looked over Arabella's shoulder, scanning the edges of the crowd. He needed to see her one last time. He found her standing under the shade of the old oak tree. Lily wore a simple grey dress that had no lace or jewels, yet she looked more beautiful than any duchess in the garden. She stood with her hands clasped, watching the party with sad eyes. She looked like she was already saying goodbye. Suddenly, a flash of light caught Logan's eye. It came from the dense rhododendron bushes just behind Lily. It wasn't a bird. It was the glint of metal in the sun. Logan's eyes sharpened. He saw the curve of a dark wooden bow. He saw a gloved hand pull the string back tight. The arrow was aimed directly at Lily's heart. Time seemed to freeze. The music faded into a dull buzz. The laughter of the guests sounded miles away. In that split second, the oath he had sworn that he would never love a commoner crumbled into dust. It didn't matter that she had no title. It didn't matter what the club members thought. It only mattered that she was about to die. "Logan," Arabella asked, frowning, "are you listening?" He didn't answer. He didn't even look at her. He dropped his crystal glass, shattering it on the gravel, and took off running. "Lily!" he roared, his voice tearing through the polite chatter. He sprinted across the immaculate lawn, his boots tearing up the grass. He saw the assassin's fingers release the string. The arrow hissed through the air, a blur of death flying straight for her. Lily turned, her eyes going wide with confusion. She didn't see the arrow. She only saw the Duke running toward her with a look of terrified desperation on his face. Logan didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He threw himself forward, diving between Lily and the bushes. Thwack! A sickening, heavy sound echoed in his ears. A burst of heart-searing pain exploded in his chest. The force of the arrow knocked him backward, slamming him into Lily. They tumbled to the ground together in a tangle of limbs. Screams erupted from the party. The music stopped with a screech. Logan gasped, trying to breathe, but his lungs felt like they were on fire. He looked down. A long wooden arrow was buried deep in his chest, right through his velvet waistcoat. Bright red blood began to spread across the dark fabric. "Logan!" Lily screamed, her voice full of pure terror. She scrambled to sit up, pulling him into her lap. Her hands pressed against his chest, instantly stained with his blood. "No, no, no. Help! Someone help him!" Logan blinked, his vision swimming. He saw the blue sky spinning above him. He heard the chaos of the guests running and shouting, but mostly he felt Lily's tears dropping onto his face. He reached up with a shaking hand, his fingers brushing her cheek. He was bleeding. He was dying. But as he looked at the woman he had saved, he realized that for the first time in his life his heart was finally beating. For 3 days the Duke's bedroom was silent, except for the soft crackle of the fireplace. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight to block out the sun. Lily sat in a chair by the bed, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She hadn't left his side, not even to eat or sleep. The doctors said the arrow had missed his heart by barely an inch, but he had lost a lot of blood. Finally, a low groan broke the silence. Lily jumped up, leaning over the bed. "Logan!" His eyelids fluttered open. He blinked, trying to focus on the dim room. When he saw her face, he let out a shaky breath. "Lily," he rasped, his voice dry and weak. "You're safe." "You foolish, stupid man," Lily sobbed, holding his hand tight to her cheek. "You jumped in front of an arrow. You could have died. Why would you do that?" Logan tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his chest. "Because," he whispered, looking deep into her eyes, I realized that a world without you isn't a world worth living in." Lily shook her head, tears spilling over. "But your oath. You told everyone you would never love a commoner. You said our blood was too thin." "I was a liar," Logan said firmly. "I was blind and arrogant. Rank means nothing. Blood means nothing. You are the only thing that matters." He took a deep breath, gathering his strength. "Help me up." "No," Lily protested, gently pushing him back. "You need to rest. You're too weak." "I have been weak for too long," he insisted. "I need to set things right. Now." He pushed the covers aside. Leaning heavily on Lily's shoulder, he stood up. His legs shook, but his will was made of iron. Together, they walked slowly across the room to the large glass doors that opened onto the balcony overlooking the front courtyard. Outside, a huge crowd had gathered. Servants, villagers, and noble guests who had stayed behind were waiting anxiously for news of the Duke's fate. When the doors swung open, a hush fell over them. They gasped to see the Duke standing there, pale and bandaged, but alive. Logan gripped the stone railing with one hand to steady himself. With the other, he held Lily's hand tight. He looked down at the sea of faces. He saw Lady Arabella sitting in her carriage, looking annoyed. He saw his mother watching from the garden, smiling through her tears. "Listen to me." Logan's voice was rough, but it carried clearly across the yard. "For years I told you that duty was more important than love. I told you that a title made a man superior. I was wrong." He turned to Lily, looking at her with such open adoration that the crowd murmured in shock. He pulled her forward so everyone could see her, the gardener in her simple grey dress standing next to the Duke. "This woman saved my heart long before she saved my life," Logan declared. "She is no commoner to me. She is my equal. She is my love." He looked out at the shocked faces of the nobility. "And she is the future Duchess of Ashbourne." A moment of stunned silence passed, and then the crowd erupted into cheers. Lily stared at him, her heart soaring. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "I'm still just a gardener." "And I'm just a man who loves you," Logan smiled. He didn't wait for another word. In front of the whole world, the Duke of Ashbourne leaned down and kissed the gardener, sealing a new promise that would last forever.